Cyber.
Coming up on today's show, we'll be covering the Metaverse. How are cyber professionals going to navigate cybercrime in the new dimension? Hyperpersonalisation and privacy. How to strike the balance between privacy and convenience. And world events around cybersecurity attacks. The world keeps turning, and so do the incidents. Joining me today is Tulin and Scott, welcoming them onto the show today. How are you both? Thanks for coming. It's cold outside, so
warm in here.
It's definitely warm in here. So we're going to be moving on to our first topic today. Now, the first topic is about the Metaverse. The Metaverse has the potential to be free and endlessly intriguing, which is a new area for communication, e-commerce, and leisure. However, cybersecurity experts believe it can be opening a brand new can of worms of where the parameters start and stop. And who exactly are we dealing with? Are people who they say they are? Let's have a look.
After Facebook's parent company, Meta, named itself to reflect its new direction, the term gained a lot of traction. Meta is the next evolution of social connection. The Metaverse, which is expected to be worth $760 billion by 2026, is already growing, with Meta, Microsoft, and Google revealing plans to construct new virtual worlds. Despite the fact that the consumer-facing version of the Metaverse is still more of a concept than a reality, there have already been concerns raised about the possibility of cybercriminals and others with malicious intent using it for criminal purposes, such as fraud, disinformation, or money laundering. As studies demonstrate, the cybercrims aren't afraid to get inventive when it comes to seeking new ways to damage individuals and businesses. However, once the concept is grounded in the reality of social interactions and human conduct, it quickly displays several flaws. What will it mean for users when hate speech and cyberbullying take more physical forms of avatars and have personal ramifications? And who will safeguard them in the universe of codes and nameless strangers?
The Metaverse, it still kind of trips me out a little bit. Let's just hear it. What are your thoughts on this?
Sure. So I completely agree with you, KB. I think, it's such a different element, adds such a different element to our everyday life. And not only in business, but also, in your social life and in how you're buying goods and services and how you're interacting with the community. So, that not only introduces a whole new world to everybody, but it also introduces a lot of risk. And not only for the businesses, but also individuals themselves, right? Because we already have, a lot of our people, a lot of our community already don't know a lot about cybersecurity. And now that, they've introduced this Metaverse and Facebook's, working towards it and all of that, it's just adding that next element of complexity to people's lives, which makes it even more challenging for everybody when it comes to trusting and using these technologies.
Most definitely. Scott, what are your thoughts on the Metaverse? Are you on the Metaverse yet?
Not on the Metaverse
No?
yet.
Okay.
Well versed in the Metaverse though.
Yeah, right, okay.
So there we go. So, if I have a look at, the areas where fraud and cyber criminals and the elements that are, I guess, to be concerned about, they're usually financially orientated. So if I have a look and stay away from, the providence of, digital art and all those other sociable areas, because that's a journey and a conversation in of itself, is if you have a look between transactions of any form of value, typically for the last, 400 or 500 years, there's been an intermediary, either central banks or banks which are highly regulated. So for the good and for the bad, there's intermediaries with recourse to look at the, the repudiation of the people presenting themselves, plus it's regulated, they have audit facilities and all of that. All of that is out the door with the Metaverse. So for the fact that, everything's underpinned with, crypto and then with blockchain and there's non-repudiation, and these are fantastic things, if people aren't able to identify themselves or something goes wayward, the ability for recourse is removed. You're on your own. So
well, it's still a wild west out there. There's no regulation, there's no government. Who knows? Maybe I'm not dealing with Scott. You know, maybe you look completely different, and I think that's what really is confronting. I think from a consumer perspective, but from a business, it's almost like we're going to have this. What is the real world? Is it meta, or is it how we see it today? And for us, who've been living in this normal sort of world, or the world as it was before, it's completely going to change the dynamic, and it's also going to create like this sense of dilutedness. So I'm curious to know then, from a business perspective and from a cybersecurity concern, what are your concerns?
From the perspective of the underlying, core crypto implementation, it's solid, it's well founded in, mathematics and things like that. Where the concern comes in is the implementation of it. And what I mean by that is people are already struggling now moving to cloud-based environments, which are very, I guess, again, within a highly regulated environment. If people implementation of the services that they're providing in the metaverse, whether it's 3D rendering of some virtual world or artwork or whatever happens to be, if there are vulnerabilities or exploits or the controls within that code is deployed into the metaverse, the ability for people to exploit that, these are the cyber criminals, will become very apparent. So that's probably the biggest risk.
But what gets me is we're not even dealing with the cybersecurity incidents we have today, and now we're just sort of bringing on this whole new world. So how's it going to look? What are your thoughts?
Look, I think it's going to be very, very challenging. And as Scott mentioned, we're already struggling with, moving to the cloud, and companies and people and individuals and even people that work at these companies are struggling with understanding the cloud, how it works, how do we secure ourselves, how do we make sure, we don't have leaks, or we're, producing our code properly and implementing, privacy and security by design when we are implementing code. So all that kind of stuff, I think we're already struggling with it and we're being challenged. So it's just going to take it, it's just going to add so much more craziness and the complexity around it that I think we will have more cybersecurity incidents. And I feel that if companies jump on this bandwagon of the metaverse, that's fine. But what you need to keep in mind is at the end of the day, like it is today, your users and your employees at your company are the people who, basically create cybersecurity risks and create these leaks and create these breaches, right? So if you're not training them and you're not educating your staff and all of your users, then you're already going to be facing a lot of breaches and incidents.
Most definitely, and I think that we're just encouraging almost the cyber criminals to say, hey, here's another new thing that we can't even deal with the existing things. So I don't know, like if you're a company, would you advise someone to say, let's get on the metaverse? Is that what you say?
There's been.
I sound like a very old person now. Like, can I get on the Facebook?
I think it's like any new concept that has value. Whether it was cryptocurrency.
But do you think it's a bubble though? This is the thing, like crypto, blockchain. Now look at crypto.
Well, if you have a look, and I take a logical extension from the internet for communicating, and then commerce came from it, through to social media platforms. If you have a look at the trajectory between social interaction and commerce,
right,
I'd be foolish to say that there wouldn't be something in it. What form it takes, I don't know, but there's more interaction. And so if you have a look at, again, history is a good determinant of the future, is people are looking for a more interactive experience and a more convenience. So if I take...
Convenience, sorry to cut you off, but your convenience meaning from our own home?
Convenience from the ability to, I'll use an example. So let's say you're trying to do some online shopping or trying to buy something in its simplest form. Right now you have this two-dimensional form where you have picture, you might have sound, you might have moving picture, then you've got a checkout and you're scrolling between screens, right, which is not intuitive to a human. Humans are used to walking around retail stores and things. So what Web 3.0, the metaverse, will afford you will be that augmented reality where you can walk in with goggles into a more natural environment, select things and be more tactile, and then perhaps go to a checkout, and everything will seem more human-like. And I guess that's why I believe it won't be a fad, because everything that we've been developing, particularly around social media and retail experience and art and culture, has been looking to try and replicate the physical experience.
I agree with Scott completely. You know, I think people are hoping that we move towards that, but what they don't realise obviously is like the complexity that will bring then to your everyday life, and obviously your identity and protecting who you are as a person, and then how you're interacting with these stores. Or, you know, for example, if you're going into a store and you're going to purchase, let's say, a pair of pants or something, and how do you know if that's really the shop assistant? How do you know that you're dealing with someone authentic? I mean, yeah, exactly.
But that's what trips me out still, because I like to know that you are who you say you are. And so now, I mean, I interviewed a lady from Microsoft about the emerging digital identity and the metaverse, and it was off the charts. Like, how do you validate who someone is? Because you can't.
Well, yeah, that's the challenge
But
that
then
we're
that's
going
the
to
part that I
face.
struggle
Yeah.
with, I think.
Well, you can, but can you do it with a high degree of certainty? And that's where the risk comes in. So when you're authenticating somebody physically, there's enough visual cues. Then you move into a digital world where you might have digital certificates or password, whatever it happens, a digital credential.
Right.
Again, operated by an intermediary, be it PayPal, your telco, who's done a 300, 200 point, 100 point check, whatever it happens to be. There's some checks and balances, auditability, and a trusted intermediary to authenticate those, to provide recourse. Once you're into the metaverse, there's an inherent reliability that you trust the system because there isn't anyone else. So you are in its very basic form, there'll be proponents that say the underlying principles of NFTs is it can only be one authenticated digital credential that pertains to you. The issue is, again, I go back to the implementation of that and ensuring that that credential, which is unique, is actually the person that it's bound to. And that's where there's these new challenges that will come into play into the metaverse.
Moving on, smartphones, wearable technology, and supermarket loyalty cards are all part of the hyper-personalisation environment. Everyone knows who you are, what you buy, where you live, and your shopping habits. But can you have personalisation and privacy at the same time? Let's find out.
The hours we spend scrolling endlessly through various gadgets leave a trail of digital footprints that are already affecting our future. However, this plethora of data is also responsible for improving our Netflix and Spotify experiences, as well as our shopping experiences. According to Epsilon, 80% of customers prefer to shop with a company that offers a personalised experience. Essentia mirrored these thoughts, reporting that 91% of shoppers prefer to buy things from companies that remember their preferences and give them with appropriate offers or recommendations. Consumers have a fighting chance of ultimately receiving the individualised services they demand without surrendering the privacy if the content quality and tone, as well as the timing and delivery mechanism, are all done correctly. Should they, however, be cautious about what they wish for?
I personally don't mind hyper-personalisation. I mean, I'd rather have ads targeting me that are relevant to me than ads that are not relevant to me, like camping. Like, no, I'm out. It's like that ad is definitely not for me.
No, you're definitely not a camper.
What are your thoughts? I mean, it's the whole privacy and, ads. I mean, Google now is getting rid of third-party cookies, but to me, I don't see it as a bad thing.
I'll start with private. There is no privacy. I mean, that concept was lost years and years and years ago. So you have to kind of give that up a little bit. In terms of the hyper-personalisation, I tend to concur with that. You're getting slammed with so much stuff. You don't want this erroneous rubbish consuming your eyeballs all the time. So I'm definitely an advocate for it. But there's kind of like a point where, where have you transgressed good taste? And, for me, I'm like you. If I've been searching around and whether it's camper vans or tents, or the things, or my new hiking boots, the things that I cherish very much, and you're in the zone because you're about to go on that once in a lifetime camping holiday, then eventually it is okay to be served advertising material and stuff like that. Where I wouldn't like something in terms of it is where, say, my awards program or something made a birthday offer to me. Because I have a look at that as identifying information. So, again, paranoid cyber guy is I begrudgingly give up my date of birth to the minimum requirement. So if I had some third party starting to serve up offers, I'd find that intrusive.
Right. Right.
And probably the other one where I can see something being an unintended consequence is around the application of AI. They said during the last elections in the US, they've never been more polarised for left and right. And so all of us carry biases. So at the moment, being very, I'll call it evidence-based around news feeds and things, I would like to be served something that was objective and evidence-based. If your bias is going into the hyper-personalisation, the AI could drive me down unconscious bias and turn me into, or have my reality distorted because of things that I'm not even acutely aware of. So that's where, again,
Another distorted reality.
So as long as it's got a feedback loop in it, so as long as it's not using personally, really, overstepping the mark, and or as Netflix do, have the human intervention feedback loop where you can say approve, disapprove, has this met your criteria, would you like to go off in another direction, I think it's fine.
Yeah, I agree with you guys completely. I think it's great because I would rather have something that's targeted at what I've been searching or looking for or what I've shopped for previously rather than just a whole lot of garbage that, you might not be interested in. But it's also quite... Yeah.
Sorry, Scott.
It's all right. There's got to be someone there to prop up Anaconda.
That's no, but that's fair. You like camping. Like I enjoy going fishing, and I'm kind of forced to do it because of my husband, but that's fine. So that sometimes pops up for me, and I'm like, this is a bit random, but no, it's all right. So I completely agree. I'd rather have it like very targeted, but there is that blurred line, right, with how much information are they actually using to target these ads. So like you said with your date of birth or anything like that, that's more personalized to you. I think that's very intrusive, and I don't agree with companies that use that data for their marketing and for their like putting their ads out to people. So I think when companies are looking at implementing like hyper-personalisation and using these AIs, they need to be very careful with the data that they're using and how they're using it and where they're storing it and who they're sharing it with, right? Which is something that we're seeing as such a big issue at the moment with a lot of the different privacy laws and standards that are out there globally. So.
Do you think it's a naivety though? So for example, to your point, Scott, when you go into an e-commerce store, retailer, and they say like, what's your date of birth? Because we'll send you a $10 gift voucher for your birthday. I think a lot of them actually don't know that they are storing and holding PII. So I think that I get the reasoning from a marketing perspective, but then it's like, oh wow, actually we have a lot of information on yourself. And so I guess that's what then poses the risk. Would you say that it's a naivety, or do you think these people are well aware and they just do it anyway, just to annoy you?
I think it's a bit of both, to be honest with you, because I think in the end of the day, our data, like with our purchasing, like everything is like, it's a trend, right? And it's data, and that's what they sell, and that's what they use to make more money. So for them, I feel like they almost know, and they've gotten away with it for so long before, everyone kind of had this uproar about you need to tell everyone what cookies you're using and they have to accept it, and it has to be a click through, and they can pick and choose what they want, and you have to be open about the kind of what you're doing with this information. So I feel like up until that point, they were probably getting away with collecting that information and using it more than they are today. Yeah,
it's I concur. It's commercial imperatives always take precedence over, I'll call it compliance. So, or risk is probably a better way, because it's actually a risk. So the why was it done initially? I would say out of pseudo naivety and the commercial imperative, and there was no consequence. The consequence of compliance is still the lowest common denominator, because everybody will just do the lowest standard in order to comply with privacy, but they're not bought in. When I think there'll be a groundswell, or there'll be a change in attitude, is when the public, us consumers, start to understand and make informed decisions about companies that have been forced to do disclosure, so they're laissez-faire about the way that they treat people's data, and then people will vote with their feet and their wallets, and that's actually what will drive more good more good behaviour.
So from a business perspective, how would a company like manage to provide exceptional customer experience versus overstepping the privacy line? How do you manage that balance? Like you said, like privacy is out the window, and I think that since we've been online since like even like the 90s, like that's where it started to chip away at you. We're losing part of our privacy, right? Like people are on social media, they're doing online banking. So I think that unless you're not on the internet, it's going to be very, very hard to sort of potentially toe that line. Like, can you maybe talk a little bit more about that?
I think just general awareness is going to help drive some of that behaviour. So where people are more aware about reading, you know, policy, you know, the privacy policies that people have when it's up there, and making sure they're not, you know, all lost in four-font legalese and, you know, the real meat's, you know, page 76. Mm-hmm. So I'll try and answer a different way, is I think organisations are going to position themselves much better when they're very transparent about it, and they keep it very simple, and they talk about in plain language what they are and aren't going to do with your data.
Right.
And then you see those feedback loops and initiative. I think the more that there's skullduggery and, you know, people are aware and they're not silly now about the Google, you know, optimization and AI. I think there's a rudimentary understanding in the general psyche about that type of stuff occurring. Mm-hmm. And so now that people are, I guess, more educated, they'll make more informed decisions about who they do and don't want to interact with.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think it comes down to that education and awareness piece where I feel like nowadays, like in the last probably couple of years, people have become more aware about, oh, actually, they are tracking our data. They're tracking what I'm doing. They're tracking how I'm doing it, how I'm interacting, you know, with your website, whether I'm buying something or not, and why I make certain decisions, including your age group, your gender, you know, whether you were born, you know, in this time or that time, and whether that impacts the decision you make when you're purchasing. So, you know, I feel like people are becoming more and more thoughtful about how they're doing it. And I feel that there's been these programs and companies that have popped up, not sure if you guys have seen or heard of them, where they do these cashback offers, like if you use their app to purchase, you know, certain things from certain websites. And that's just more of a way for you to kind of hand over your data, right? So that, like, I've looked at those agreements and I've looked at kind of what they're collecting, and it's like quite funny that people fall into that trap, that they think they're getting this money back and they don't have to do anything, but really you're handing over all of your information to these companies who are basically mining that, looking at it and trying to target and make more money from you. And if they're giving you just like a 0.01% of that in terms of cash, then in the end of the day, they're still winning.
But do you think, I mean, there's a lot of people that I know outside of our security bubble, they just don't care. They're like, oh, it's convenience, I don't care, like who cares? No one's gonna know who I am out of 1 billion people, so it doesn't matter. Yeah. So do you think that it's coming down to the younger generation, like your Gen Z and friends, or do you think it's across the board? Do you think some people care and some people just don't care?
That's right.
But identity theft, if people start to get burnt and understand the consequences of it, then I think that's very different. And that's often not spoken about. It's privacy for privacy's sake with no consequence. And so I think there needs to be a better understanding of identity theft, because if anyone's been truly smashed with identity theft, they'll understand that's the gift that keeps on giving for a long, long time in their life.
Moving on to our final topic today, the COVID-19 epidemic that has shown that cyber criminals are willing and capable of profiting on major disasters that affect our lives and our businesses. Healthcare was one of the most targeted industries during the COVID era, which demonstrates cyber criminals' ruthlessness to attack and exploit catastrophic events. Let's take a look.
It should come as no surprise that natural disasters could create a fertile environment for cyber criminals to operate in, especially if climate change increases the frequency of such cyber incidents. Natural disasters are an excellent illustration of the type of significant occurrence that produces enough turmoil for cyber criminals to thrive, since it weakens the systems and resources enough to give hackers an easier path in. A recent exercise conducted by American City of Indiana of around 500 professionals from across the city, including healthcare practitioners, National Guard personnel, and officials from state, local, and federal institutions participated in the exercise. The scenario was created to demonstrate the likelihood of cyber criminals looking to profit from an already serious situation, as well as how people who are already stretched to their limits can effectively respond to ensure critical infrastructure is not further harmed than the natural disaster already has.
So we've seen many cyber criminals capitalising off the back of COVID and other world events which we all know about. So what should businesses be focused on then?
They should be focused on understanding that this is a natural occurrence, like things go wrong, and start to consider preparedness ahead of time. So what I mean by that is we've seen a lot of activity to remediate things or to fix things after the fact, and not actually a lot into the preparedness, because it probably doesn't come as a surprise that cyber criminals aren't, good human beings, typically speaking.
Probably not, no. Good observation.
Yeah, and so they're always looking for, the path of least resistance. And so, the correlation between COVID-19 and the health industry is no coincidence.
Right.
You'll find that natural disasters and critical infrastructure, there'll be a high correlation between it. So what they're doing is they're preying on people's panic-stricken nature. Their posture's probably not as good as it could be. They're probably already under pressure to do some form of remediation work, whatever that means in each of those industries. And so when people are not thinking clearly and they're operating in a more ad hoc fashion, it's much easier to exploit people, exploit systems, and have them conduct things that they wouldn't, A, they would have no need to go and conduct, and B, make poor decisions because they're under pressure.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with Scott, and I think preparedness is so important, and I think that's what caught a lot of companies off guard with COVID-19. So with this pandemic, they didn't really have a plan. They didn't know what to do. Like, what does it mean when you can't go to an office? What does it mean when maybe 20 or 30% or more of your workforce is sick, or they're in isolation due to someone else in their household who has it? Right. What does that all mean? How does that impact your products or services, or what you might be providing to your customers? How does that impact your SLAs and your contractual requirements with these companies? So I think it has that flow-on effect, and it's something that we talk about and we might mention, but we don't ever really test for, or we don't ever really overly prepare or be more prepared for when it happens. So I think a lot of companies were naturally caught off guard, and that's completely normal, I think, when it comes to something like COVID-19. I don't think people expected it to kind of go out of proportion the way that it did. And
for 2 years.
Yeah, exactly. So very long time when you think about it. Like, how are companies supposed to then switch their operations from being in-house to being virtual and working from home, and that whole thing? So that's another risk and another change that companies had to kind of think about. How are we going to get the workforce at home? How are we going to protect them? Do we have enough people? Do we have enough technology? Do we have the budget? And how do we realign all of that so quickly so that it doesn't impact how we operate our business?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think that it forced us to change. And now, would you say that it's, I don't say it's a good thing that we had the pandemic, but it's like I said, it's forced people to think, like, what if something else happens? The monkeypox and the this and the that appears now.
Wow.
I don't want to get into that. That's on another show. Fine. But like these are the things that are happening in the world. The floods that were in Queensland recently, like that is a catastrophic event. Now with global warming, we've got polar bears in Sydney today because it's cold. So it's like there's all of these events that are happening. So would you say that off the back of the pandemic, people are more equipped depending on what's going to, curveball's going to be thrown at us, or snowball?
Well, again, keeping it very simple but very cyber risk orientated, everybody went to a work environment, and for the most part, it's a controlled environment. You have boxes and widgets and wires, and it's fairly stable and static, and you have privileged users that used to go home, and you might have been moving some business applications to the cloud. But all in all, is a very controlled environment, and you knew where things were. Once the pandemic hit, or any disaster, is typically that's all thrown, and you need to be more agile. Right. And so if I bring it back to the unintended consequences, next of all, you've got everyone at home with up to, and the stats say 6 devices. Kids are using them. I mean, the security is just out the window. And so the way that people used to deal with risk and cybersecurity is in a very, castles and moats sort of way, was like, okay, we'll put controls around it, and
We'll put a moat around
we'll put a moat around us, and we're all safe, keep the bad people out, and we'll let a few of these rogue users, road warriors and BYOD, but only on the devices that we say, well, that was gone. And of course, a lot of the way that they were looking after their technology or dealing with it was like, we're all under control, without actually understanding what they had, where it was, or how they could remediate it. So when you go into this new fluid world, whatever it happens to be, I'm a proponent of ensure that you know what you've got as a baseline, and you have a lot of automation, and you understand where all your technology resides, and you're looking at it and keeping an eye on it, because the bogeyman's going to come do some bad stuff. We don't know where, when, or how. But the more prepared you are, the more that you understand your baseline environment, the more that you patch, you know where your assets are, you have controls in a very dynamic, the better that you'll be prepared to know to either restrict something that goes wrong, remediate it, or fix it. So time to restoration and the extent to which it does bad stuff will be reduced. You can't ever eliminate it. So, and I think it was the NHS, or you could use a lot of health, of those health environments. I mean, when they got ransomware, it was done, and it was everyone all at the same time, and it took a long time to restore. Now, you could apply that to any industry. There should have been awareness that there's bad stuff that happens. How are you going to deal with it when it happens, rather than pretend that we'll try and stop anything, because that's not really a reality today.
It's not realistic either.
It's not realistic.
Well, I mean, like, no one's Nostradamus. No one knows exactly when another pandemic's going to hit, especially like COVID-19. Like, I was actually overseas when all this was happening. I'm like, oh, please, it's like some other like small flu. And then I came back to Sydney, and then within 2 weeks, that was it. Like, it was game over. And I was like, okay, this is real now. And I guess maybe it blindsided us. So perhaps, again, going back to my earlier point, perhaps because of the pandemic, now people are like, this could be a thing that may happen again. So would you say that with companies that they should always be on guard with knowing that this could happen, and perhaps were companies too relaxed before COVID-19 hit, for example?
I think a lot of organisations left cybersecurity as the domain of the IT department without truly understanding how much of an implication it has on business services. So I think there's a lot more awareness now, and we're seeing through some legislative changes and through attitude and compliance that they're looking at, or these regulatory frameworks are now looking at critical business services, and then educating people to understand that you need to not look at this as a technical widget that breaks or gets hacked, but what are the services, whether they're social services or whether it's a business service, are you providing, and are you able to sustain if A, B, C and D happen? And again, a lot more awareness going into what are they call them indicators of compromise, and who are the threat actors in the world. And this is, I won't say in the public domain, but you can go and find out, what are we most susceptible for? What are the likely areas of attack? What would be the likelihood of it occurring? And what would be the disruption? What's our ability to recover from that? And have it at a more holistic, macro level view, without trying to be Nostradamus and predict the next thing, if that makes sense.
Well, you spend your whole time sitting there predicting stuff.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think, like I mentioned before, like, it did catch everybody off guard. They weren't prepared. But I think now that we know what's happened, and now that we know how COVID impacted business and our everyday lives, and, even everything around, like, the whole charity thing and giving to charity, and they're supporting like the Queensland floods, or supporting the bushfires, or supporting other countries that are impacted severely by COVID. So all of those kinds of things, I think people are much more aware about how they're giving their money, or what kind of charity they're giving, before handing it all over, because it's happened so many times now. And I think they're looking for those more legitimate companies and legitimate charities to give those monies to, or go and do some work for, or whatever it might be. But when it comes down to the business side of things, you know, I completely agree, where I think we would be more better equipped now if another COVID-19 came along, or another catastrophic event, whether it's a natural disaster.
But do people say that though? Because it's all well and good to say we are more equipped now because of COVID-19, and that's what they say. But in reality, is that the case?
I think people are more
Depends
aware.
who you ask.
Yeah.
Well, I fortunately or unfortunately, there's a lot of consultants doing a lot of audits and testing on people's systems and their resiliency, and a lot of reports being produced for the board. But
For a tick in the box?
Yes.
well, even they go, oh, we're in a bad state, and then you're watching for the, and now what?
Yeah.
And
gonna say, and
we're
now what
now
happens?
got
Do
the
they do something about
we've
it?
now got the informed. We are now at an informed state of
Yeah.
Right.
plausible deniability is not an
It's
excuse.
not acceptable, yeah.
But now what we're looking for is, does that manifest itself into taking action?
Yeah.
And so we're kind of at a crossroads now where, as I said, some recent legislative changes are just driving that, and then you know, hopefully that will be enough to spur everyone else along.
Well, that's all we have time for today. Thank you, Tulin. Thank you, Scott, for coming on the show. I'm your host, Carissa Breen.